everyone, and hello, Peter Katz.
Hi, Robyne. We followed through. We heard your voice first this time.
I appreciate that. Peter mentioned yesterday or last time we connected about this idea that he always started, and he gave me the invitation to start, although I had to say I actually much prefer Peter welcoming us, but I will give it a good try, I guess. And so, Peter, I'm very excited that we connect today in time to have this conversation.
Me too, Robyne. And just curious, I'd love to know, where are you in time in this moment?
In this moment, I'm still at home appreciating some quieter days. But what's amazing is the weather's changed so dramatically over the last wee while. So it's just been this amazing shift. Even though I'm in the same place, it's just amazing to see how one of the beautiful things about living in Canada is we can go from, minus 30 winter snowstorms to like mild conditions. So even though I'm in the same space, it just feels so different just because the weather is so different right now. And Peter, where are you today?
Well, Robyne, what shifted for me is I seem to have developed a cold, and I feel like getting sick these days is just such a more dramatic thing than it used to be. I have memories of I remember being on tour, and I was so sick. I was backstage. I was literally shaking, trembling, feverish, almost hallucinating. And I was like just trying to muster the strength to stand up and walk out on stage. And I did. And I played my set somehow. And it was obvious to the audience that I was on the verge of death. And they were like cheering me on. And then afterwards at the merch table, they walked up and gave me hugs and said, great job. You really pulled through. I'm like, that would never happen anymore. Yeah, you have to just go into a dungeon and wait it out. So I'm a bit under the weather, but my spirits are already lifted just being here with you, and I think I'm also in time of this probably is the last time I will be in this space. I'm taking all of this apart and moving into a new space with my partner Tess, and so that's also sort of where I am, kind of mentally, energetically in time, as I'm in a space of transition between spaces.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I appreciate that. And actually, we talked before about this idea that, sometimes that transition time can be for some people, like it's exciting and they look forward to it and, fresh starts, new beginnings. Yet for some persons, that in-between time or that waiting time, or what they call like the meantime, right? Like in the meantime, we're going to do this, sometimes can be extremely hard on our sense of groundedness and our sense of safety. And I recall, and I've shared this with you before, but I recall how sometimes my mother would say that meantime, for some people, it's like no big deal, right? It's just kind of wait it out and see how it goes. But for other people, that meantime actually felt like almost like harsh. It was like difficult because like we sometimes don't want to be in those waiting seasons or those transition seasons. So I just want to like hold space for you that I appreciate. It's again, just riddled with those dual truths where we can be excited and look forward to it. And we also know that it takes a lot of work to manage that in-between time or that meantime. So the fact that you're under the weather, I'm not surprised, because so often when we get ourselves into those seasons, it actually is our body's way of just trying to slow down and to recover and to repair.
Yeah, I think my body deserves some repair, and I'm also just sort of struck by this time and these kind of transition threshold, perhaps meantime moments, just the emotionality or the emotions that get kind of locked in our physical spaces and in our possessions, as I've been kind of pulling things out of the cupboards and stuff. I mean, I shared with you before we hit record that when I was married, we had a house, we had a garage, and so I had lots of stuff in all that space. And then I went from that into a furnished, bedroom basement apartment, and so I had almost nothing left, and then my place flooded, and so I really had nothing left, and I think other than my guitars and some gear, I basically had no possessions, and then I've been in this place, I don't know exactly, I think 4 years or so, and so I've acquired all this stuff, and but I just, as I'm pulling different things out of cupboards and shelves and looking at things, there's just this wave of emotions and these kind of time capsules, and it's quite a thing, and there's a weight to it of like literally you're burdened down by these physical things, and there's also just, you realize like how much you're carrying in your memory bank, and sometimes you just touch an object and there's this whole door that gets opened, and some of those doors open up a sense of hopefulness that you had at a particular moment, and others you realize like, oh, that didn't come together as I thought it would, and so it really is quite a process to kind of be with our stuff, our possessions, our space, and I don't really know the best approach to it, but I'm certainly kind of taking some photos of things, sharing them with people as they come up, and I found this container of tea that I had bought when I first met Tess. She had served me turmeric tea, and I'm actually drinking turmeric right now, oddly enough. And I had bought this, and I sent her a photo of it, and we just had a nice little moment around it. So there's a specialness to it as well. So any thoughts for you around moving, possessions, transitions?
Oh, Peter, do I ever have a lot of them. But, it's interesting because I used to always say, if I just had like a weekend at home, I could like get all this stuff sorted out, right? If I just had like 2 days at home, if I just actually had even a week at home, oh my gosh, I could get this house decluttered. I could get everything figured out. And then what was so amazing, I think, is that because of the recent world events with the global health pandemic, I actually had 2 years at home, like 2 full years without travel. And that stuff still didn't get organized. So what was a really interesting reflection for me, Peter, is actually wasn't about the time. So I would acquire these things and have all these things. And then I would tell myself, I just don't have time to sort and to organize and, declutter and do all that things. But then I realized, okay, well, now that I actually had 2 years with this stuff, clearly this isn't a time issue. And I think what you're actually scratching the surface on is the fact that we have like emotions attached to some of these possessions and these things. And for some of us, it's actually like hard to know what to do with it. So, we just kind of keep acquiring things and kind of putting them in other places, perhaps just because we don't even know what to do with it, because our emotions and memories and lived experiences are actually attached to some of those things. So I appreciate there's a lot of folks who have lots of ideas on, how to declutter. And I remember a couple of years ago, Marie Kondo's big movement about pick up an object and ask, does this bring you joy? Well, what happens if it's sentimental and the joy, it's not joy, but maybe it's like an artifact or an object or something that has a memory attached to a loved one. And actually it invokes grief. Yet that grief is actually, I think grief, again, it's so complicated, but it's also so precious because it's this living testament of how much love was shared between that person that you're no longer with. So again, whenever I feel my grief, especially for me, it's always associated with my mom, having lost her 10 years ago. That grief that I feel is like, it's like a link that I still have to her. And I don't want to ever lose my grief, because that is a symbol of this relationship that lives past the time that we had together. So again, I think there's so many complexities to it. But one thing that I have learned, and this is kind of my kind of go-to strategy, is the fact that how we kind of interact with our stuff. So we want to be in the driver's seat of it and not feel as though like the stuff is like controlling us, right? So as long as we are in that place where we feel as though like we are in that place of being able to work with it versus like it kind of like overwhelming us, I think that makes a big difference.
I love that. And I appreciate the nuance. I definitely have been like lifting sweaters and being like, does this spark joy? And I'm not always sure the answer, but I do have one little tip that a friend shared with me that I've done pretty successfully. And certainly when I had to go from my house into that furnished basement apartment, one thing that he had shared with me was to just make a list of the objects that you're going to get rid of, but just literally write down like, oh, that mood ring I got in Florida, or like whatever it is. And I sort of evolved it, and I take pictures of everything. And when I was cleaning up my house and I had to get rid of just a ton of stuff, I just took pictures of things, and then got rid of them. And what was amazing about that process, beyond the fact that I got rid of so much stuff, is it brought the objects back to life. Like I found old love letters from my first girlfriend when we were 14, and I sent them to her, and we had a good laugh, and I sent pictures to friends from high school, and I sent, I said mood ring earlier, but my brother and I used to have this little ring that was like some kind of toy we got at McDonald's or something, and we used to say zap, you're an alien, this thing. And I found this little ring, and I sent him a photo of it, and we had a good laugh about it. And in a way, the objects actually, they came to life in a way that they never would have just sitting in a box. And I have this one section of photos on my phone from that time. And I just sometimes go to that and I reference that, or I send a photo to somebody. And so, I think there's a way to keep the object without keeping the object.
I love that.
And I'm actually glad we're having this conversation, because you just kind of reminded me of that. That could be a strategy that I kind of make sure I employ as I'm trying to sort of clean things up here. But yeah, that exercise of writing the list or taking the photos or both was super helpful, and maybe helpful to some of our listeners.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a powerful idea. And I love the fact that it actually also builds community by the fact of you sharing it with your friends, with your brother, with Tess around the tea. I love that. It's creating connection and community. And again, I think that's what this is always comes back to, is the power of community and connection and shared and lived experiences. So I think that's really powerful. And, it's funny because in my family, I'm like the purger. I'm the person who can get rid of things. And everyone else seems to be able to hold on to things a little bit better. And I never really knew where this kind of ability to let things go came from in terms of physical things. So for example, I can declutter a closet ruthlessly. And again, there'll be every once in a while, one or two things that might pause. And again, it's something that's usually affiliated with maybe when the kids were little, or again, my mom or something, but most things I can move through quite quickly. And it was interesting because I remember one of my family members asked me how are you so ruthless when it comes to getting rid of things? And I recall, do you remember years and years and years ago, Peter, when there was movies that were playing at the cinema, and you would actually have to either call the phone number to find out when showtimes were, or you would actually have to look in the newspaper and it would have the showtimes. I remember I would have been little, I think maybe grade 2. And I remember my dad opening the paper and saying that there was a movie he wanted to see. And now my father's involved in the television and film industry. So there was usually a reason why there was a certain movie my dad wanted to see. And the movie he wanted to go to see and take us to see was a movie called The Mission. And this was a movie about a group of Jesuit priests, and it was amazing because it was with Robert De Niro and Daniel Day-Lewis. They were the two main actors, and there was this one scene where this Jesuit priest was starting to build community with this indigenous place and was trying to actually protect these indigenous lands, and he had all of this all of his possessions, and he was visiting this village, and he had to climb up this waterfall, Peter. So this is this spectacular scene in this old movie, and this man is trying to carry all of his stuff from his previous life. We're talking silverware, we're talking teapots, we're talking like armor, because he was like, he had been a soldier and he had all this stuff, and it was in this like gigantic net thing. And Peter, he's like climbing up this waterfall and he keeps falling because he can't actually carry all of this stuff with him. And then like eventually kind of the moral of this is then he kind of grabs his knife and like cuts the rope and lets all that stuff go. And you see this just cathartic release. And then he's able to actually make this new journey into this like season of his life. And I remember just this moment. And again, the soundtrack, right? Like the music of the mission is like just spectacular. And I just remember being so moved as a child that we don't want to be held back by those things, and things come for like a season of our lives. And then essentially like, you know, we get to that place where we realize the value of letting certain things go. And it was interesting. So when somebody said, why are you so ruthless? I was just like, well, there was this one time I saw a movie when I was like 8 years old, and there was this mission guy climbing this waterfall. And, you know, we don't want to carry things into our future because some things aren't actually meant to go into our future. And so it feels like a bit of a philosophical reason as to why I might be ruthless with certain things. But then on the flip side, I think our lived experience really speaks to how we feel about the things that we have, you know, and I look at, you know, how many of us were raised by parents and family systems who, you know, were part of the Depression. And so, you know, there is this kind of sense of like holding things on because they didn't know what was coming next. So I think being able to let things go is a privilege, and it really speaks to, you know, our access to resources. And for everybody, we have our own story about what our relationship is with holding on to things and letting things go.
Being able to let go of things is a privilege. That's so true. And I had several flashbacks as I was listening. First of all, I love that image. I've not seen that movie, so I will watch that and look for that scene. That I was reminded of my grandparents, and you know, in their basement, my grandfather had this all the tiny little shelves with like every little possible screw and you know gasket and like he would just reuse everything, and when they passed and we had cleaned out the house, there was just this. I mean, it was incredible how resourceful he was, and certainly, I don't think either of us are promoting filling up the garbage dumps of the world. You know, it's like certainly you can put it back in the system and let somebody else be a treasure for them. But yeah, I was just reminded of how kind of thoughtful they were with everything, and yeah, that's something that I kind of admired that they did that, but it also was burdensome to have that much stuff and that many files, and although I'm just going to share one favorite memory is my grandfather, like in his last year of life, he was just so healthy his whole life. But he had a stroke in his last year, and he was still himself, but he was just like a little bit kind of slower all of a sudden. And but we were in his house, and we were getting rid of some stuff, and he had these file cabinets, and in the file cabinets there was the old cards, like that, you know, that had not been sent, and one of them was a sympathy card. He said, "Hey, here, you can send this to me." Oh. So he had a sense of humor.
Peter, that's so special. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Peter, that is so special. It reminds me of a colleague of mine when she lost a parent, and they were cleaning out the parent's house, and the mother had left a folder of like stuff you need to know when I'm gone. And it literally had all of her bank account numbers. It had her will. Like it literally had every possible thing that like people needed to know. It even had like the siblings, like birthdays, cousins, wedding anniversaries, like on a calendar. Wow. Like she had left everything. And then at the bottom, she had, there was 3 children in this family, and there were 3 sticker colors. And she said, I've gone around and put stickers on things that I thought that you might like. And if there's anything there that you want to do, like a swap with your sibling, swap it out. But she said, there is nothing in this house that I want you to feel obligated to keep. And so what was amazing is like in this big storm of grief, they like went around that house like they were like children on Easter morning, flipping over things to see what color sticker she had put on things, because she had blue for that one child and yellow for another child, red for the other child. And so they're like, I wonder why mom thought I would want this. Right. And it just created this conversation of joy. But then there was also this gift of ease that this is, here are some of the things that you had mentioned over the years that you loved of my possessions that I want to pass on to you. But then also, you don't have any pressure to keep any of this either. I just thought that was just so special that even afterwards, now some might look at that story and be like, well, she was controlling, maybe a bit of controlling, a bit of just trying to keep the peace, whatever it might be. But I just thought, what a gift to be able to give people the opportunity to still have that connection, those conversations, and also just that kind of that permission almost that, we don't let these things have to hold us back, or we're allowed, as you said, these can become treasures for somebody else.
I love that. One of my favorite books is by Robert Fulghum. His most famous book is Everything I Needed to Learn I Learned in Kindergarten, but he has another book.
Yes.
I think it's called The Way of Transitions, or managing the transitions of our lives, which is kind of a theme of what we've been talking about. And one of the things he talks about is sort of not dying without having taken care of that stuff, and we're so afraid of death that we put these things off, and then we sort of leave a bit of a mess for our families, and what an act of kindness and love to be with the reality that we will transition at some point, and to really be. He's all about rituals. I think it's called the rituals of our lives, and to really think about that threshold moment, and to see that in a way as a ritual, and what do you want the components of that ritual to be? And so I love the design in a way that this woman that you're describing, the interactivity, the thoughtfulness, the care. I find that really moving.
Oh, there you go. Well, Peter, on a more different swing, I do believe in one of our previous episodes, you said you had a story of a question.
I do,
and it was a bit bigger. And I want to make sure, because we did kind of set it up as a wee bit of a cliffhanger, and I don't want to leave people hanging too far into the hangings off cliffs. So my friend, can you, if you're feeling up to it, or if you're curious still to explore it, do you want to share with us the story you saved for us for today?
I do, yeah. So I think it works well with some of the themes that we've been talking about. We've talked about time. We've talked about sort of connection. We always talk about those things. So, here's the story. So I went home for the holidays, and I'm the baby of 4 siblings, and we've always been. The scene in The Sound of Music, the Von Trapps that all kind of sing before going to bed. We've always been this crew. The 4 of us just have always gotten along so well, and we were always the Katz kids, and I've just had the best relationship with my siblings my whole life. It's just such a blessing, and even with everything that happened, with my family, that has been this. It's really moving to think about my connection with them. That being said, of course, our lives have evolved, and we get busy, and my sisters each have 2 kids. And so we generally get together twice a year. So we try to obviously get together over the holidays. And then for many summers, we've rented a cottage for a week together and come together. But my sister, Jennifer, her husband was in the foreign service, and so they actually were overseas for the last 20 years. And so she would come home in the summer, but she was never there for Christmas. And even when we rent the cottage, there's lots of people and kids, and it's busy. Yes. And so you're spending time together, but there's, how you can have these people, I think I mentioned this in one of our last episodes. There's these people that you love, you care for, you feel this connection with, but you don't necessarily get to drop more deeply with them, and that can literally go on for years. And so I was meditating in the morning. I was in my mom's basement, sleeping on the futon, like classic old school scene. And I was doing this meditation, and I had this idea. As you know, I'm really into facilitation and question design, and I like run organizations through all these kind of connection activities and choreographies. And I was like, I want to do that with my siblings. And so I sent them a text message. I created a little group thread, just the four of us. And I said, hey, I basically said, I don't think the four of us have hung out, just the four of us, in 30 years. I don't, like, certainly before the divorce, before I was 12 years old. And I said, and we might not be just the four of us until one of our parents dies. And so I'd love for us to like go for a coffee or breakfast, and I'd love to facilitate a few questions, and just have an opportunity to connect. And so they all answered me right away. And, they all said yes, and we went out for this breakfast together, and I asked them 3 questions. The first question I asked was, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact question, but it was essentially, what is a gift or wisdom or part of yourself that you feel that you got from having been a part of this family, and that sort of serves you in your life, something along those lines. The second question was, what is something that you love about yourself, that no matter what changes in your life, you want to carry forward? And then the third question was, if we have the good fortune of being back here together a year from now, connecting again like this, what would you like to be celebrating, and what support might you like to receive throughout the year to help you get there? Mm-hmm. And so I asked those 3 questions. I had prepared another question, which was around the lines of like, how would you describe your relationship with our parents right now? And what might you like to have it be different by the time they pass away? But that was a bit too. Mm-hmm. As everyone answered the first question, I realized that wasn't the right place to take it. So I swapped out the second question. But perhaps in another family dynamic, that might be a nice question, given that we're all children of the same parents. But in my circumstance, it wasn't the right question. But anyways, my point is we sat there for 3 hours, and we listened, we laughed, we cried, and what is like so worth taking note of is when we create the right container, we can suspend time, and we can drop in and connect in the ways that we dream of, just by creating the right conditions for that to occur. I know in a previous episode, I described sort of setting up my physical space here, because my partner was going to be coming over. We're going to be having a difficult discussion. And so I sort of changed the lighting and the music. And I feel like this is just another example of, in this sense, the container was not so much the physical space, although I did make sure we found a table off in the corner where we wouldn't be interrupted. But the container was the questions, and was the invitation, really, that we were going to connect in this way. And I just feel like that was one of the best things I've ever done. And another 30 years could have gone by, and that could have not happened. And so I just want to encourage everybody to create those containers with the people in your lives and the people that you love. And it's not complicated. It's just a matter of coming up with some simple, meaningful questions and putting the intention of, hey, I love you. I care about you. I'd love to connect in this way. Can we find the time to do it? And I'm so thankful. And I think this will now be an annual tradition. So just wanted to share that.
Peter, that is so special. Like, oh my goodness, on so many levels. The fact that I love that you had this like stillness in the morning where this idea sparked, and you had this idea, like that little whisper in your heart. And then now you've created that environment, that situation, that opportunity with the right intentions to then all of a sudden have this like spectacular connection, growth, learning moment with your siblings. Like that's like, so often we talk about this idea that so many of our relationships, and, we blame media and things like that, Peter, that we have these like romanticized views on what relationships could be, or what partnerships, or what parenting looks like, or siblinghood looks like. And what you just shared is this like real and raw opportunity for like deep connection with the people that we love. And it isn't like this romanticized view of like, hey, that's not possible. You just gave us this blueprint that it is possible when people show up for it. And I just think that is so amazing, because I find so often we're in this pull of the fact that like, hey, real relationships aren't like that, right? Like what you see out there, that's not what real relationships are about. But what you just shared with us is that there's this like authenticity to like real connection and that sense of belonging and that purpose and coming together, that it actually is better than some of those romanticized fictional views of what relationships are. And you just gave us a blueprint on how to do it by just inviting people, following that little spark in your heart, right? You so many of us have these ideas that like pop in our mind, and then, well, people are too busy or we make assumptions, but you followed that little spark, and it like what set ablaze to this memory that you now have with your 3 siblings. And I just think that's so amazing. So cool.
Thanks, Robyne. I appreciate being seen like that. And I find that the more that I get into the facilitation work, and the more I'm thinking about questions and how human beings are sort of primed to connect, and what that container needs to look like, I kind of also walk through the world and I see the missed opportunities. I was at a funeral recently, and after the funeral, we were all invited back to, one of the children's houses, and we're standing around, and people are just sort of talking about what kind of cheese they like, and I was like, what if we asked, like, what is the favorite memory that you have, or what is the lesson that you learned, and it would just have totally changed the experience. And I think it's so many of us are sort of drained by social situations because of the small talk, and because of the it's exhausting sometimes just trying to come up with something to say. Whereas if you just put a simple little question, something that has a little thought that maybe is cueing a story, a memory. Certainly you need to have willing partners in that, but I think most people would rather have that quality and depth of conversation than talking about the weather or whatever other things that we get up to.
Oh, you're so right. You're absolutely right. And again, I don't even know after coming out of COVID how to do small talk well anymore, right? My skills were so rusty for small kind of passing conversation versus like, oh my goodness, my heart was so ready for like real conversation. So Peter, thank you for sharing that example of how to do it. Just that one gentle piece, because as someone who has tried and wanted to have some conversations with people in my world. And I actually remember talking to my therapist about like preparing to try and have one of those conversations with somebody I really wanted to have a conversation with. And she, we talked it through, and I kind of got my questions ready, and I was really looking forward to it. And she gave me just that gentle awareness. She said to me, now, Robyne, you are very skilled in talking about these things. And she said, I just want you to hold space, recognizing that you may be having this conversation with an unskilled person in this area. And it wasn't that it wasn't like a moral issue. It wasn't good or bad, or like, it was literally brace yourself, because you have these conversations. Like, you literally can have these conversations, and some people are unskilled, and not that means you can't have it. It's just that piece around kind of managing your expectations, and like mine personal expectations, but also seeing yourself in a role as a bit of a guide on how you respond, how you use open-ended questions to try and like keep that conversation going, and how, again, not just using like the I statements, but really leaning in and saying, this is what this experience is like for me. And because all we can really do is talk about it from our own experience. So again, thank you for sharing your spectacular memory, and it's so remarkable you had that this past, this just recently with your siblings. And my gentle invitation for folks who are listening who want to have that conversation with their person or those people in their lives, they might not necessarily have the skills, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we don't have the conversation. We just go in understanding that it might look different, but our skills in these areas can actually be gifts that we can share as well.
I appreciate that very much, Robyne. And even though I was messaging my siblings who I've spent my whole life with, there was a vulnerability in sending that initial invitation. I felt like, oh, is this stupid? Is this weird? Is it like, even though I know that they would be okay with it, I still felt that. So I certainly appreciate that you're giving people the context that not everybody might respond in that way, or there might be an expectation which might lead to a sense of disappointment. I wonder if in a future episode we could share with people sort of there's different levels of questions, and just sort of offer people like the sort of what's the Starbucks, like a tall grande venti or whatever options, right? And just good. So there's ways to sort of have an entry point that are not necessarily, tell me your deepest, darkest secrets or whatever, but just ways to gently move a conversation. That might be something that we could talk about.
I think that's a perfect thing to talk about next time.
All right. Well, I see we're over our time limit. We did not have time to ask ourselves our question. Do we do the rapid fire, or do we save them for next time? What do you think?
I think we should save them for next time. And I'm excited to continue this conversation, because I think knowing how to have the right conversations in the right time will actually help a lot of people. So I'm excited, Peter. As always, thank you.
Me too. Thank you, Robyne.